5 centuries ago, before dating gurus, before viral threads, before anyone tried to reduce attraction to a checklist, a man sat in forced silence, cut off from power, reputation, and purpose. Niccolo Machiavelli was no longer a respected diplomat. He was a dismissed official, financially strained, politically irrelevant, watching from the margins as the world he once influenced moved on without him. No audience, no applause, no status to defend. And that is exactly where something dangerous began. Because exile does something to a man. It strips away illusion. It removes the need to flatter, to posture, to play along with comforting lies. When you have nothing left to lose, you stop writing what sounds good and start writing what is. Machiavelli didn't produce a polite philosophy. He produced an autopsy of human behavior, a work so unsettling that institutions tried to bury it, so brutally honest that leaders feared even being associated with his name, not because he taught cruelty, but because he exposed the mechanics behind it. He described what people actually respond to, not what they claim to value. He separated image from instinct, virtue from leverage, desire from narrative. And here's the uncomfortable part. For over 500 years, Machiavelli has been labeled manipulative, immoral, dangerous. Yet most of those who repeat that judgment have never seriously engaged with his ideas. Even fewer have understood the psychological depth behind them, because his writing was never just about princes, wars, or political games. It was about people, about the invisible patterns that govern attraction, loyalty, fear, admiration, attachment, the forces operating beneath polite conversation and romantic storytelling. Now let me ask you something directly. Have you ever noticed how often advice about women sounds idealistic, but your lived experience feels very different? How what is praised publicly is not always what is rewarded privately? How certain men struggle endlessly, while others, often saying less and doing less, seem to command attention effortlessly? Machiavelli would not call this mystery. He would call it human nature. This video is not a rant about modern dating, not a complaint, not ideology. It's an investigation, a deep dive into the psychological drivers behind attraction and emotional investment. The motives rarely admitted but constantly acted upon. And according to Machiavelli's framework, beneath romance, beneath chemistry, beneath all the words we use to decorate relationships, there is one core force, one underlying motive, powerful enough to explain why desire ignites, why attachment deepens, why passion fades, and why women choose some men while walking away from others. Most men spend years reacting to the symptoms. Today we examine the cause. Let's uncover it. But before we go any further, there's something you need to do. You need to momentarily drop the lens you've been trained to use. The polite lens, the romantic lens, the socially approved lens, and try to see the world the way Machiavelli did, without anesthesia, without decoration, without the comforting stories that make reality easier to swallow. Because Machiavelli didn't terrify the world by promoting darkness. He terrified it by removing disguise, while others wrote about how people should behave. Noble, loyal, virtuous, principled, Machiavelli paid attention to what people actually did when pressure entered the room, and pressure always enters the room. He watched how affection shifted when circumstances changed, how loyalty weakened when benefits disappeared, how promises dissolved when survival or advantage was at stake. Not in theory, in life. And here's the part most people miss. He didn't rage about it. He didn't moralize. He didn't condemn humanity. He observed, he recorded, he exposed patterns. In Machiavelli's eyes, human beings were not guided primarily by ideals, but by incentives, by self-preservation, by emotional security, by material stability, by whatever increased their chances of safety, status, and continuity. Kings, soldiers, clergy, friends, lovers, husbands, everyone, and yes, women. Not because women are uniquely strategic or self-interested, That's a lazy interpretation, but because they operate under the same biological and psychological laws governing all humans. But Machiavelli noticed something society still struggles to admit. When men act from calculation, it's called leadership. When women act from calculation, it's called manipulation. Same mechanism, different narrative. Society prefers the myth that women are driven purely by romance, emotion, devotion, moral purity, that their choices emerge from feeling alone, untouched by strategy, risk assessment, or long-term benefit. Machiavelli didn't buy that story. He saw that women, like men, navigate reality through a mix of instinct and evaluation. Conscious or unconscious, constantly weighing risk and reward, security and uncertainty, loss and opportunity, emotional payoff and future stability. Attraction is not random. Attachment is not accidental. Choice is not blind. And this clarity, this refusal to participate in illusion is what made Machiavelli dangerous then and deeply relevant now. Because the moment you remove the fantasy that love is unconditional, automatic, or permanent, something shifts. You're no longer looking at relationships as destiny. You're looking at them as agreements, fragile ones. Agreements that survive only while both sides continue to experience value. That idea alone makes many people uncomfortable. We've been raised on a different script. Love as fate, chemistry as magic, connection as something mystical and untouchable. But Machiavelli's lens is colder, more grounded, less forgiving. Desire has context. Attraction has triggers. Affection has conditions. And commitment? Commitment is never guaranteed. People stay where their needs, emotional, psychological, practical, are being met, and they detach where those needs begin to erode. Not always consciously, not always maliciously, but predictably. Now let's address the tension directly. This dynamic becomes especially visible when we talk about women. Not because women are heartless, opportunistic, or deceptive. That's the simplistic, angry interpretation. But because historically women paid a higher price for choosing poorly. For most of human history, a woman's survival was tied to her partner's competence, protection, and status. The wrong man didn't just mean heartbreak. It could mean social ruin, economic instability, physical danger, loss of security for herself and her children. Men could recover from bad romantic choices more easily. Women often couldn't. So female psychology didn't evolve in a vacuum of poetry and emotion. It evolved under pressure, under risk, under consequence, under the necessity of discernment. Long before modern dating culture, women had to develop sensitivity to signals most men barely notice. Is this man stable? Is he respected? Is he capable? Is he safe? Is he going somewhere? Or drifting nowhere? This isn't calculation in the villainous sense. It's adaptive intelligence. It's strategy shaped by reality. Machiavelli understood that when your well-being depends on another human being, idealism becomes a luxury you cannot always afford. You don't choose based on words. You choose based on outcomes. And beneath every romance, no matter how passionate, dramatic, or intoxicating, he saw a silent negotiation taking place. Not spoken aloud, but constantly evaluated. Will this connection strengthen my life or destabilize it? Women learn to ask this question instinctively. Modern women still ask it. They may frame it differently. Compatibility, emotional safety, shared values, long-term stability. But the underlying mechanism hasn't changed. Because beneath the language of love, the mind is still measuring risk. Most men hear this and feel an immediate resistance, not because it's irrational, but because it collides with a story we were taught very early. If the love is real, it should be enough. Enough to override doubt, enough to survive neglect, enough to compensate for instability, weakness, inconsistency. But Machiavelli would calmly dismantle that belief. He wouldn't say this perspective kills romance. He would say it removes delusion. Because when you accept that loyalty is conditional, that attachment has limits, that even deep affection exists within boundaries, love doesn't become meaningless. It becomes real. It becomes something sustained, reinforced, earned, not something magically guaranteed by emotion alone. When Machiavelli wrote that people remain loyal only while it benefits them, generations of critics called him cynical, cold, even monstrous. But look carefully. He wasn't promoting selfishness. He was describing gravity, an unavoidable law of human psychology. Human beings can care intensely, sacrificially, passionately, but not infinitely. There is always a threshold, a point where emotional investment collides with emotional exhaustion, where the cost of staying begins to outweigh the reward of continuing. You've seen this play out, relationships that seemed unbreakable, collapsing after a job loss, partnerships that couldn't survive a financial downturn, marriages strained not by hatred, but by shifting expectations, shifting identities, shifting power dynamics, friendships that evaporated the moment, convenience disappeared. Machiavelli would ask a question most people avoid. Were these acts of betrayal or simply human nature reaching its limit? Now let's bring this into uncomfortable territory. Apply the same logic to women. Women are frequently fed a very specific moral script. Be patient. Be forgiving. Be endlessly supportive. Stay loyal no matter the circumstances. Give more. Expect less. Female sacrifice is romanticized. Female standards are scrutinized. And Machiavelli would recognize this immediately for what it often is, a social strategy, an attempt to regulate female choice by redefining virtue as self-denial. Because a woman who tolerates everything is praised as pure. A woman who evaluates, filters, rejects, demands is labeled difficult. Machiavelli's stance was radically different. He believed that protecting one's self-interest, emotional, physical, financial, is not moral failure. It is psychological strength. A woman who safeguards her stability is not selfish, she is rational. A woman who refuses to abandon her needs is not cold, she is self-preserving. And any relationship that requires her to shrink, to endure chronic dissatisfaction, to accept imbalance in the name of love, is not love. It is dependency wearing a romantic mask. This single shift in framing changes everything. The question stops being, why do women want what they want? And becomes, why wouldn't they? Because across centuries, across cultures, across radically different social systems, one behavioral pattern keeps resurfacing. A woman stays when the relationship adds to her life. She leaves when it starts subtracting from it. Simple sentence, brutal implications, and enrichment is where most men completely misread the situation. Because enrichment is not just money, gifts, or comfort. It can be emotional depth, a sense of safety, admiration, intellectual connection, sexual polarity, shared direction, feeling chosen, seen, valued. Far less superficial than stereotypes suggest. In fact, if you strip away the cliches, what you often see is something sharper, a highly tuned sensitivity to shifts in atmosphere, effort, energy, and stability. Call it intuition, call it perception, call it emotional intelligence. Machiavelli would call it pattern recognition. But men who don't understand this dynamic tend to experience the same shock. They hear "I love you" and translate it into "this is secured." They see commitment and unconsciously relax their edge. They assume early attraction equals permanent loyalty. Effort softens, presence weakens. Complacency creeps in quietly. Then one day something feels different. She's more distant, less warm, less responsive, less invested. And to the man it feels sudden, irrational, unprovoked. But Machiavelli would say, nothing sudden happened. The signals were there, the balance shifted, the perceived value changed, the emotional return declined. Because relationships rarely collapse in an explosion, they erode, millimeter by millimeter, conversation by conversation, disappointment by disappointment. And here's a difficult truth. Women, conditioned both biologically and socially to detect instability faster, often register those micro shifts long before men do. A change in confidence, a drop in direction, a subtle loss of emotional strength, a growing inconsistency between words and reality. And when that internal calculation crosses a threshold, they act. Which is why betrayal feels like lightning to the man who never examined the foundation. He believed love was a permanent guarantee. Machiavelli understood it as a living contract, alive, dynamic, continuously evaluated. Like any contract, it remains valid only while value remains present. And now, after centuries of romantic mythology, moral sugarcoating, and cultural denial, we arrive at the insight that still makes people uncomfortable. Because once the illusions dissolve, once you remove fantasy, projection, wishful thinking, Machiavelli's conclusion is disturbingly clear. Women are not fundamentally chasing perfection, not universally chasing wealth, not universally chasing dominance, beauty, status, or some cinematic ideal. Those are variables, surface-level expressions that fluctuate with age, environment, and circumstance. Beneath all of it, there is one constant: security. Not just financial security, emotional security, psychological security, relational security. The security of feeling understood rather than controlled, respected rather than merely kept, chosen rather than managed. The security of knowing that loyalty will not slowly turn into exploitation, that affection will not decay into indifference, that commitment will not harden into complacency. The security of being with a man who does not fracture under pressure, who does not retreat when responsibility intensifies, who does not secretly resent her standards, her awareness, her strength. The security of stability without deadness, passion without chaos, connection without suffocation. And if you listen carefully, everything else orbits around that core. Security does not mean protection from life. It means protection within partnership. Life will always be unstable. Markets crash, bodies age, plans fail, stress arrives uninvited. Chaos is part of the deal. The question is never whether turbulence appears. The question is, when it does the relationship feel like shelter or additional pressure? Because when that sense of security erodes, Machiavelli's verdict would be mercilessly clear. The relationship is already ending, whether anyone has spoken the words yet or not. Not because love vanished overnight, but because the foundation cracked. And this is where many men misinterpret the message. This is not an accusation against women. It's an acknowledgement of reality. Security is what makes love sustainable. Without it, vulnerability becomes dangerous. Intimacy becomes risky. Trust becomes fragile. Emotional investment becomes a gamble. With it, something very different happens. Walls lower, defensiveness softens, attachment deepens, desire stabilizes instead of fluctuating wildly. Security is not the opposite of passion. It is what allows passion to survive beyond the honeymoon phase. Machiavelli never argued that humans are incapable of love. He never claimed relationships are doomed. He argued something far less dramatic and far more unsettling. Relationships work only when they align with human nature, not with fantasy, not with ideology, not with moral storytelling. People, including women, remain loyal, where loyalty feels meaningful, dignified, emotionally rewarding, and stabilizing. Remove those conditions, and loyalty doesn't explode, it dissolves. Understanding this does not make you cynical, it makes you calibrated. It makes you stop taking detachment personally and start examining dynamics structurally. It makes you more aware, more composed, more emotionally disciplined, even more compassionate, because you begin to see that most relational collapse isn't driven by villainy, but by misalignment, by neglected fundamentals, by ignored warning signs, by slow shifts no one addressed. The world tried to bury Machiavelli for saying these things aloud, but truth has a strange property. It survives punishment. And today, instead of fear, it offers something else: clarity. If you want lasting love, Machiavelli's strategy would not be romantic. It would be precise. Don't chase fantasy. Don't demand unconditional devotion. Don't lean on promises as if words can override psychology. Create security within yourself, within your direction, within your emotional stability, within the relationship you're building. Because attraction may ignite connection, but security is what sustains it. Provide what maintains attachment, not just what triggers excitement. Because in the end, the only thing women want is the only thing all humans want. A partnership where their identity feels safe, where their future feels protected, where their emotional investment feels intelligent, not reckless. And once you truly understand that shift, you stop obsessing over being chosen and start becoming a man who naturally is. Welcome to the real world. Less poetic than the fairy tale, far more unforgiving, but the only place where love can actually endure. Before you go, let me ask you something. How much of this felt uncomfortable? Not because it sounded wrong, but because it sounded familiar. Because theory is easy to agree with, recognition is harder, so I want to hear from you. Comment security is the core. If you've ever witnessed this pattern in real life, in a relationship, a breakup, or even just in the subtle shifts of attraction and respect. Not a generic comment, that exact phrase. I want to see how many men here have actually seen it, not just listened to it. And if this perspective challenged the way you've been conditioned to think about love, dynamics, and female psychology, then the video appearing on your screen right now is your next step. Because understanding what women ultimately crave is one thing. Understanding how men unintentionally destroy attraction without even realizing it is another level entirely. Click the video on your screen, watch it carefully, and if you value content that doesn't sugarcoat reality, like the video, subscribe to the channel, because we're just getting started.